to Two Wings. I'm Kandi Spangler with Jet Aviva, and today I'm here with my friend Erika Armstrong. Erika, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Look at this cool place to film.
I know. I was wondering if you had ever, I know you've done a lot of podcasts in the past, so I'm just kind of curious. Have you ever done one in a studio this cool?
Hell no. No. And I'm going to ask you to change the name of your podcast to Two Chicks on a Cockpit now.
All right.
Yeah.
I think this is what we're going to do for today. We're going to do chicks in the cockpit instead of the chick in the cockpit because there is more than one of us. And we are going to get into the cockpit in a little bit, but I'd like to jump right in and start asking you a few questions. You and I met earlier this year at an event that we hosted, the Denver Business Aviation Summit, and I gathered several industry experts to talk about some different topics that I feel are meaningful for business aviation operators and owners. And you were a wonderful addition and was so happy that you could join us for that. But tell me a little bit about where you're at today with your company and about the training you provide.
Yeah, I'll give you my whole life in 1 minute or less. No, I started off in business aviation. Just like you, I kind of found it by accident. So I worked in a whole bunch of different roles in business aviation before I went to the airlines. So I've had this great opportunity to start off in business aviation, go to the airlines, and then come back into business aviation and see how much has changed for the better. And that's why I love when you do your panel topics and bring in all those experts to come in, because we didn't used to do that. Yeah. So just that opportunity to share that information has changed the industry for the better. So it's a great opportunity for me to come back and see that. So I work for a company called Advanced Air Crew Academy. So we work with like 500 different flight departments. So we do business aviation training, but we also work in the industry. So we're constantly seeing any of the safety challenges, how we can fix it, what we can do to make the industry better, and just tell more than the next generation about business aviation. Because just like you, everybody, when I was learning how to fly, everybody was so airline focused. There's this huge industry that is just growing that a lot of pilots skip over and they're missing it. Look at this. I mean, this is, oh my goodness.
Aren't we so lucky?
We are, yeah. So I try to encourage the next generation to take a look. So when I was teaching over at Metropolitan State University, that's the first thing I did was I asked the students, what do you want to do when you grow up? 95%, they were all airline pilots. I'm like, oh, you people. So hopefully by the time they got done with my class, I was trying to tell them how cool that is and how much more being a pilot is like being in business aviation.
No, it's a great point to bring up, because I was telling you earlier, like, I went to Embry-Riddle and nobody talked about business aviation. It was this afterthought. So it was more commercial and military, and they had great programs. So I love what you were doing with Metro State, because I tell younger people all the time, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And you don't know what questions to ask. And I am so happy that I had this accidental discovery of business aviation. I can't imagine being anywhere else or working anywhere else, because I love showing up every day. I mean, what's not to love about this?
How many people can say that, right?
Right. Unfortunately, very few, but I feel like there's a great job for everybody out there. You got to find your passion. So let me come back to kind of your humble beginnings. I read a little bit that you were like a dispatcher in the corporate world. Tell me what it was like back then, because we're talking about the 80s, right?
Yeah.
I was not in corporate aviation yet. But not far behind you. But tell me what the culture was like then versus now.
Yeah, it was still the wild, wild west of aviation. And I truly found it by accident. I was looking for a job that had crappy hours. I was at college. I had 2 jobs, couldn't find anything that fit in. So I truly found business aviation by accident. Found a company at the Flying Cloud Airport, came in as the front desk chick. Walked in the door, didn't know the phonetic alphabet. I mean, I still remember the first day the Unicom radio was like, somebody was talking to the FBO, and I'm like, I didn't even know how to talk on the radio.
So we're good, buddy.
Yeah, right. the trucker, BJ and the bear. I think that I'm so glad it happened that way, because I started off at that lowest rung, And then I worked in maintenance. I worked back in the avionics department, and I was doing all this other stuff, processing work orders. So that, for me, that triggered this fascination for aircraft systems, which I ended up teaching later on. So all these things were happening at the time. I didn't realize how cool it was because it was just a job. I was $5 an hour making, at the front desk, right? But we had a charter department, but no flight trainings. But the FBO next door, back then, they would give you a free flight lesson because they knew they could start your addiction. So they'd give you a free discovery flight, and that was it. I was hooked. So that's why I'm so much more intentional now, trying to introduce aviation to the younger generation. We're catching them too late. There's so many choices out there now. I mean, all you do is have to look at a college course catalog and look at all the options out there. Yeah. So we aren't catching them fast enough, and definitely not educating them on business aviation enough. So
yeah. Well, so one of the things that you mentioned, it being the wild, there's this idea of a safety culture, right? And this mindset that we're operating within the guidelines that the FAA sets forth, right? And back in the 80s and 90s, especially in the 70s, there was a lot more aviation accidents. And then, they really started instituting this safety culture. And what I thought was interesting that you brought up earlier is the fact that you might actually think you are a safe operator, a safe pilot. You are operating within the guidelines of the FAA. And it's not until after the fact, after something has happened, whether it's an incident or unfortunately an accident where lives are lost, that you can go back and go, oh, we thought we were operating in a safety culture, but actually there was lots of room for improvement. So tell me a little bit about what you've seen over the years and what advice you would give pilots, especially newer pilots that, again, don't know what they don't know. What are some things that they can incorporate into whether they're becoming a pilot, to really kind of hone in that safety culture, to take a step back, almost out of body, to look at what they're doing and how to be a better pilot and more safety conscientious?
Yeah, we could spend 8 hours talking about that. That's a huge question, but it truly is. And just like you're saying, you don't know it when you're in it. Until you have things to contrast it with, you don't realize. Because my first big piloting job, it was just high energy, mission oriented company. We did air ambulance. We were 24/7. We were just hustle. We'd be as busy at 2 a.m. as we would at 2 in the afternoon, right? And so none of us think we're unsafe, right? As long as we're operating within the boundary of the rules, we think we're being safe. But the company I worked at ended up having 2 fatal accidents. Yeah. So very early in my career, and these are pilots that had really high time, and it makes me want to go back and put myself into that seat and realize what that person, why did they make that mistake? What is it that in that reflex, in that mindset? So we were often rewarded with getting the mission done. I mean, and they would often use the rules against us. I still remember, one of my very first 135 trips, I was sitting out in Las Vegas, and our passengers were out gambling, and it's getting later and later. We're looking at the clock going, we're not going to make our duty time. We have to leave now. And so I remember calling the owner of the company up and telling, the situation, and they're like, just give us a couple minutes. And I'm like, well, how are you going to fix duty time? So all of a sudden, they're like, there's a fax coming in. So they had sent our passengers a Part 91 lease agreement and had the passengers sign it. And so magically,
now you're
Part 91. And so here they are using the rules now to force us to continue on in a situation we hadn't rested. We've been sitting in a lazy boy all day long. So that was the mindset back then. Over the years, there's been more of these safety standout types of conversation. And I think as people like me and you come to the industry and now start taking more leadership roles, we're more able to bring with us that perspective of how that safety culture has started from the top, right? So, we're here to make money. At the end of the day, every pilot here is making money. So we have to make sure we keep that balance of safety, because one accident is more costly than anybody coming off in duty time. So it's taken the industry many, many years. And I think a generation now to come through and change that leadership culture. And it really is a trickle down. If you've got, even if you're a dispatcher, because I did dispatching, and I still remember putting pressure on the pilots. And like, come on, man, I would smack talk them and like try to get them to get the mission done. And
I'll send you to Hawaii next week.
yeah, all the bribes and stuff to get things done. So even if you've got it coming at you from different angles and stuff, you don't realize, that kind of pressure being put on. And then your passengers, they spend a lot of money to be where they are and to get where they want to go. And we used to do all the mountain flying, Aspen, Telluride, and I still remember that pressure from the passengers saying, we got to get there. We got this wedding going on, and just that, you really don't want to disappoint them. And I have to admit, even too, as a woman, I would push myself a little farther because I didn't want them to ever think it was because, she can't do it. So it took years and that ability to say no that kind of changes the culture. So.
I've told this to a lot of my friends in the industry, especially the pilots. And I think this holds true, is your job as a pilot, especially the captain of an airplane, your job is to have the ability to say no to the people that pay your salary.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's hard, right? It's not easy, but at the same time, that is your job, is to keep them safe. That's why they've hired you. Certainly it's to get you to point A to point B, but in a safe manner. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about, because I found myself in this position as a pilot as well, I think that I have a safety mindset. Like, I've been in operations for a long time, and yet you go in like, hey, do I have get there-itis? I don't want to be pressuring
to be able to have that multi-dimensional thinking, but it's their kryptonite because they'll get so focused, like, I'm going to do this, they forget I could not do this, right?
Yeah.
So if I think about all the close calls I've ever had, I'm like, oh, thank God I'm still here.
Yeah.
I knew it at the time. And I look back and just could kick myself because I knew.
Yeah.
And not speaking up. The couple times where, when you get back to on the ground again and your legs are shaking and you're like terrified and you're like, oh my God,
That was a situation I could have avoided, should have avoided.
yes, it was avoidable. And the couple that I can think of, it's because I didn't speak up. It's that I had the co-pilot mindset. Most of my flight time is in a crew environment, but the single pilot operations too.
Oh yeah.
Little things like I know they sound stupid, but like at the last workshop, there are things you can do as a single pilot operator, and it sounds stupid, but if you start to learn how to talk to yourself out loud, you will become a safer pilot, because when you force yourself to speak, you make your brain align a thought process, and when you speak it out loud, it takes on a different context.
Yeah.
So next time you're flying by yourself, I know you feel stupid doing it, but if you start doing everything, read your checklist, and talk to yourself and say, is this smart? How's that crosswind looking? You know,
Yeah.
if you start speaking out loud, you'll become a safer pilot. And I know it's a stupid thing, but
It's not like, and I talk to myself all the time, whether it's on the airplane or not. But one of the things that I vividly remember was my first solo.
okay.
So this would have been in 94.
Okay.
And I remember my instructor getting out of the airplane, and it was July. I was like sweating. It was in Ohio, so it's high humidity. And I was in a 172, and you taxi out. And I remember turning my squelch way up so I could hear myself breathe, first of all. And the other thing I was doing was talking to myself.
Oh, good.
Because it was almost like having my instructor talk to me.
Yeah.
And so even though you're the one saying it, you're also hearing it through your headphones, which you can't actually hear it because everything's going through your audio panel. So talking to yourself, it's interesting to hear you say that, like, this is an actual scientific way of kind of getting out of your own thought process and doing it in a different way. Because I did that for my solo. And I remember I felt like my instructor was talking me through the whole thing, even though it was me talking through myself through the whole thing. So very interesting. So talking about single pilot, I feel like this is a decent segue to talk about FAA versus insurance, right? So the FAA might say, hey, this is legal. And whether you're single pilot or a two pilot certified airplane, there's rules and regulations. But nowadays, it feels like really it's the insurance companies who say what you can and can't do. And often those minimums are a lot different or a lot higher than the insurance. How has that evolved over the
you know what? And you're so right. I still remember when I was just getting into the corporate world, I would plop in the right seat of any airplane. I would never seen it before. They'd put me in there like, let's go. And that's how
you have a pulse, you have a pilot license, let's go.
You run the radios, that was it. So, but the cool thing I've been seeing in the last couple of years, because the insurance companies are cracking down, and there's kind of a trend for all these single engine turbine aircraft, like the Pilatus and stuff that are out there on 135 charter. And even the King Airs, that was my lucky break. So aircraft that are certified with one pilot don't need the person in the right seat. But the FAA and the insurance companies have kind of come into some of these flight departments and said, hey, we want you to operate with two pilots. The insurance companies are doing that too, which I love. So I love it when they put the pressure on, because what that will do is if you're a 135 company, you can add an operating specification that's 062, I think it is. It's a professional development program, second in command. But what it is captain's training. And so if you have that in your op specs, you can legally log flight time in the right seat on a 135 flight for an aircraft that doesn't require two pilots. So it's a great opportunity for a lower time pilot, like 500 hours, to get in the right seat of a King Air.
Yeah. And
start logging time. And the insurance companies, will possibly give you a discount if you've got a two-pilot crew. And having two pilots, even a younger, inexperienced pilot, is exponentially safer than having a single pilot operator. So, and of course, now we're seeing the headline news where the airlines are even looking at single pilot operations with automation. But so I do see the benefit of having the insurance companies set some guidelines, because it's helping, because we're dwindling in numbers of pilots. Anything we can do to help somebody get some real time, instead of grinding around building your Not learning,
Yeah.
you know,
And it's expensive
it's super expensive.
because I'm trying to do the same thing. I just got my multi-commercial
Yeah.
and I'm looking for anybody that'll put me in the right seat because I want to keep those skills up. They're the freshest when I get my certification. So I want to keep that up so I can gain experience flying King Airs, flying CJs,
Right.
you know, something little that I just, I want to learn from the person in the left seat, right?
There it is.
That's the best mentorship that you could ask for.
Yeah. What a better opportunity to have somebody sit in our right seat in a turbine aircraft learning that instead of just sitting in the right seat watching another person fly.
Yeah.
You know, flight instructing. So, I mean, 90% of the people still have to go out and get their flight instructor rating to get it. But, I love seeing the other opportunities that are coming that, you see it as a benefit instead of a negative. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here.
Okay.
I want to talk about you as a professional, a woman who has also had a family. And I mean, I know that, you know, for a lot of people, if you're watching that you're thinking about a career in aviation, doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, like we all want to have that balance, like home life. We want to go home to our families eventually. Like, you know, when we're younger, we don't think about that stuff. But certainly if you're looking for a career in aviation, whether it's business aviation or commercial aviation, especially as a pilot, you're going to be on the road.
Yeah.
That's your job. There's a few jobs out there where you get to come home every night, but they're few and far between. So certainly you're going to have to figure that piece out of it. So for you, like, especially as a woman early on in, like, there was probably less than 6,000 female pilots in the country at that time, because I know those numbers were very low when I started flying. And we're seeing more. I can't remember what the numbers are, but I want to say they're up around 20 now. Does that sound right?
We're still at about 6 or 7% in the airline.
Okay. Yeah. So we're starting to see more females, but you said that there was a scientific reason behind that, and then I'd like to dive into how you balanced family and your career.
Yeah. I'll just tell you right now, there is no balance.
No such thing.
There's no such thing.
Okay.
And that's what I enjoy about what you're doing today, because having a realistic conversation about the up and coming generation is the key. So as long as you have an understanding of what your future looks like, you'll be much more able to handle it. So, you know, when my students were coming in my classroom and they're 17 years old, you're like, you know, you're probably going to get married and have kids. And they're like, oh, hell no, way down the road, right? I'll take care of it later.
Right.
But have that self-awareness, right? Because what makes you happy is going to change over time. And there are so many different segments of aviation. So like you said, there really are some jobs now. Even I met a pilot the other day who is never going to leave the regionals because he's home every night.
Yeah.
And he's making good money now. And so I've seen the whole industry shift and change, and they're doing a much better job.
Right.
You know, people ask me, why aren't there more women pilots? And, you know, instinctually everybody says, oh, because you're gone all the time. But my response is, well, look at all the flight attendants.
Yeah.
The majority of them are female flight attendants. They're gone even more than pilots are. So that's not really the
reason.
case. It's not the reason. So, you know, in aviation, being a pilot is a much more intense career, right? You don't leave it behind. It's you actually become a pilot. It's everything you do and say. So if you look at, and I'm going to bring in the science of this, I know, it is just a weird angle on it, but if you analyze the observable behaviors of pilots and what makes you a successful person, and I'm mostly talking about airline or crew environment, flying airplanes like this, you need to be able to exhibit this certain personality. And if you put it on the Myers-Briggs scale, it's ESTJ.
Oh.
And you're not going to probably test as that, but you have the ability to bend yourself into that observable behavior of that personality type, right?
Okay.
You don't even realize you're doing it, but you are. The people that stay in the pilot in the cockpit have that certain behavior. But if you look at the population of who tests at that personality level, it's like 11% of the population test in that category. Then if you dig further, Of that, only 37% are women.
Oh.
So if you're looking at the ratios of 37%, I don't think you're ever going to see a really high number of pilots, female pilots in the cockpit. Not that they can't. I just think that the personality type isn't a higher ratio than men. I think 30%, 30 to 40% is probably what we're going to see in the future.
Okay.
So
that's a really interesting factoid that I had not heard before because, there's a propensity, depending on your personality type, for different roles.
Right.
And I think this is a great opportunity to say, like, there are other roles in aviation that actually, if you don't meet that personality type, so I know this is going to be shocking, but I'm an extreme extrovert. I know, you're surprised. My husband, on the other hand, is like super introverted. And he's an aircraft mechanic.
Yeah.
He and I met at NetJets. He was an aircraft dispatcher. And turns out he just, like, sales and talking with people, that would be like the most uncomfortable, worst job ever imaginable for him. But working on airplanes, right? He's very smart. Like, he'll study things and pick them up, but he doesn't have to interact with an airplane, right? He can just work on it, and he's very good at that.
Yeah.
And so, depending on your personality type, like, don't be discouraged if you don't meet that personality type, right?
Most pilots are introverts. The vast majority, only 90% are introverts, but they exhibit this extroverted behavior in order to become part of the crew. So if you look at people that are unhappy with their lives, it's often because they have to stretch too much from what their natural, personality is at home versus how they behave at work. So one of those things is going to make you unhappy. So, right, you're having to stretch too much. That's why you can still be an awesome pilot, but you don't function well in a crew environment.
Sure.
So, wow, go look at cargo again. Go look at air ambulance again. If that is a draining, category of your life, then rethink it. So
freight or organ transplant.
There you go.
You don't have to make the passengers happy.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So I think at this point, we are going to take our conversation up to the front of the airplane and let's talk about a little bit of flying. I think this is going to be a fun section.
All right.
All right. So here we are in the cockpit of a Global 6000 here at Rocky Mountain Metro Airport. This is my home airport. I've got an office here, but I've got my commercial out of this airport and my multi-com add-on. So I did my multi here too. It's a great airport, towered airport, which is really nice. But this cockpit here we have access to today, and I thought it would be really cool for, and very appropriate, right? This is the chick in a cockpit. But today we're going to call this Chicks in a Cockpit, and we are literally in a cockpit, which I think is pretty fantastic. So, Erika, I figured, we feel right at home here. I don't know how you feel about being in the right seat, but I'm never in the left seat of a jet, so I figured, we're going to try it out. It fits pretty good. I think this airplane likes me, and we're tapped into the audio panel here, so you hear a little bit of ground control in the background, which is kind of normal for two pilots in the cockpit, right? You're talking, whether it's going over checklists or whatnot, but you always have to hear your tail number.
Yes.
You got to be listening constantly. And if you've got an inexperienced person up front with you, you always have to do this, right? Hold on, quit talking. I need to hear this person. So, anyways, so I thought it would be kind of fun to, I know that this is not a normal cockpit or you're not typed in the Global 6000. And for those of you that aren't aware, for these business jets, for a lot of the larger jets, right, where I think it's above 12.5, you have to have a type rating.
Yes.
And people don't really realize that a lot of times is you have to go to a school that's specific for the airplane make and model. And so it's like if you drove a, Ford Expedition versus a Honda Civic, right? You would have to go to school for the specific model. So we're in a Global 6000. I think the type rating school for this airplane is probably about 3.5 weeks for this kind of a cockpit. But this is very modern, really beautiful electronic screens here, not like the old steam gauges that we grew up on. And this airplane can go all over the world. So some of the things that we're looking at here, obviously we got the throttle quadrants here, but most people don't know what we're looking at here. And in fact, it looks really intimidating.
Right.
And we had a tough time finding the volume on ground control because the radios are actually up here, but we can control them down here. But that's why you go to school.
Right.
And then it becomes second nature. And so I was just going to walk through some of this stuff because you have far more, let's be clear, I have 0 jet time. You have far more jet time than I do. But one of the major components of a business jet, and any jet really, is the FMS, the Flight Management System. And I'm assuming that this is the FMS.
It is, yeah.
And so how would you use an FMS in any airplane or this one?
Yeah, I mean they're all set up differently, but the concept is still the same. And actually, while I'm sitting here, I love that the airplane can now communicate much better to the pilot.
Right.
And we were kind of laughing before we started here because we were talking about glass cockpits, and I'd been flying business aviation with the latest and greatest technology, and then I got hired at the airlines. And the first airplane I jumped into, I got hired as a flight engineer at on the 727, and everything's analog.
Right.
And I mean, we're trying to navigate with the Trimble GPS, and it's just amazing how much farther ahead business aviation has always been in the technology. But they always, whatever aircraft it is, they always try to lay it out in kind of a flow.
Yeah,
And
right.
And the systems flow, so your fuel, your all your pressurization is in the same area. That's like the cool thing. I'm a Boeing babe, so the Boeing aircraft are all laid out the same. The fuel, the pressurization, hydraulics, everything is laid out the same. So when I was on the 727, I would actually help out in the sim support. I could jump in the 747, the 737, and it was seamless because you just add an extra throttle or take away a throttle, and the systems were all laid out the same, and I love the flow of it. So,
right.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, after a few hours, you can almost close your eyes and touch everything. You know where everything is. So that's when you're first learning, this is what you do. You sit here.
Figure out flows, right? They talk about flows all the time.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, you even do that before you get in the simulator. They want you to know exactly where all the buttons are, so you know where to go. And so when you're running checklists all the time, you're not having to scramble to try to find the button you're looking for.
So when they get type rated in an airplane like this, since we're talking about it, there's actually a lot of book work, and the systems of the airplane, right? The engines are way back there, and the landing gear is way back there, except for the nose gear, which is under us. But there's so much book work that goes into this, and flying in and of itself isn't terribly difficult, right? But when things go wrong, when the master caution goes off or the master warning goes off, that's when you really need to be ready to go, and it needs to be automatic, right? You've got O2 masks over here if you had a depressurization or smoke or anything like that. And I always tell people that are flying, wow, you're a pilot, that's really awesome, that's a huge accomplishment, and it certainly is. And what I tell people is flying is actually it's really fun. Right? We have a blast doing it, but I'd say 85% of your training is really dealing with emergencies and making sure that things that you should be doing are really automatic. The things that happen immediately, like dead foot, dead engine, like you need to know how to troubleshoot very quickly and then go to your checklist, right? But talk about the emergency training that you've gone through in jets, and how you use this to figure out what's going on everywhere else in the airplane.
The simulators are absolutely amazing. You really do forget. I mean, I walk out of there, my pits are all stinky, and I'm just sweating. And
sounds glamorous.
It is so glamorous. And actually, it's so funny because every time you walk in, pay attention when you walk in the simulator. You can smell the stress and the fear.
There's like pheromones in stress, right? You can smell it.
It totally is. And so they get better every single year. So, but this is what I try to bring out to the workshops I do across the country is, we're in the simulator. We have a certain set of things we're always going to train for, right? We're going to do engine cuts at takeoff and all those things like the worst case scenarios. But I've found in the real world, when you have an emergency, it doesn't go the way the checklist says it's going to. So I always try to bring a little extra layer of training, and especially on the systems training, because you're saying how you need to know that system. See, I don't really care if you know how it works. I want to know if you know how it fails. And
Right.
when it fails, what else does it take down with it? Right. And so there's so many variables that we can never train for. So you really need to train somebody on judgment making
Yeah.
rather than, because we're going to do all that muscle memory stuff. That's what we do in the sims every 6 months or a year, depending on what seat you're in or what airplane. That's why we do it. And pilots, we're just over and over and over again. But that's what you're doing so that in that moment of startle, because we all have it,
Yep.
You have to go rely on those things that you have a synapse laid down for, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be able to get there. But the extra training is, okay, it doesn't fail the way it's supposed to, right? Things sometimes fail in between.
Right.
Like a fuel control unit maybe doesn't just quit working, it works like halfway, right? So then you have to, that's when you are a real pilot, right?
Yeah.
Now you're above and beyond the checklist and you're thinking beyond that. And so having a good systems knowledge is like the key to everything. So,
and it's a lot of systems on these airplanes that can fail and can go wrong. And they've got some nice, displays here so you can see where the indicator is. But a lot of times, it's not textbook.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we got to realize, they're not going to teach you every scenario in school. That's where your systems knowledge and experience and whatnot comes into play. So now you've been in the right seat as a co-pilot in whatever airplane that airline or business aviation. What does it take to get from that seat to this seat?
A whole change in attitude.
Are you throwing bags anymore? Are you emptying the lab? This is glamorous work, right?
You're still doing all that in business aviation. But I tell you what, business aviation is more like being a pilot, though. Man, I mean, every day is so different, right? At the airlines, you're going to the same major airports all the time. You have a full structure of airport facilities and a whole entire crew of people, helping you. But when you're business aviation, a lot of times once you launch from your home airport, you're on your own.
Right. You're doing everything.
You are.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're trying to round up catering and some weird requests out there. Man, I could tell you some stories.
Yeah.
But it's a double-edged sword. It's so much more challenging, but it's so much more challenging. It does take a little different personality type that wants to stay in business aviation, and also your ability to communicate with your passengers. Because at the airline world, man, I shut the door and that's the end of you guys.
Yeah, flight attendants have it back there.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. I did. That's one thing. Everyone has their little quirks in what they do, but I always made sure before I shut the cockpit door at the airlines, I would always quick look back at all those rows of people down there, and that was, we always talk about situational awareness, right? How easy it is to lose it, but that was my moment where I would look back there and see all those faces, and it would just make me elevate my responsibilities for what I was going to do until I landed again. So
big responsibility.
It is, but once that door shut, then we're up here and
you get to work.
We get to work. So
yeah,
yeah,
that's very cool. So getting to this seat though, what sort of experience are you required to have to go from that seat to this seat?
And I think you brushed on it before. The insurance company is often set what kind of flight time they want. In an aircraft like this, man, you're looking at least realistically 5,000 hours to be a captain on one of these, and that's what you see in the industry. Insurance companies probably don't require that high, but across the board, you're looking at about that much time. You want that variety of experience before you put somebody over there.
Yeah.
In the olden days, there really wasn't a lot of training to go from here to there. And it's a huge, different whole mindset of operating with a first officer over here. So there are some courses out there to just make a little bit more self-awareness about your role as a captain.
Yeah.
A little more captain's training. The industry is doing a little better job of trying to get people to train on that specific role. But yeah, and aircraft like this is the highest. This is a really high end.
Yeah.
Like in when you're first getting your start in business aviation, when we talked about like King Airs, uh, they still are looking at, they want you to have 1,500 hours in the right seat. But with networking,
Yeah.
there are those job openings in the right seat of turbine aircraft that are out there. You won't see them posted. It's word of mouth, so make sure you network out there. But
Yeah.
King Air captains, you're looking at maybe a couple thousand hours
Yep.
before you can get over there. So great opportunity, especially here in Colorado. We've got everything here. All the corporations, air ambulance, firefighting.
Sky jumping or
Yeah, parachuting.
parachuting thing. Yeah, just like skydiving.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was
yeah.
just like sky jumping. Not the right word.
It is.
But yeah, because one of my friends got a lot of time in a King Air, and they just go up, down, up, down, up, down.
Lots
So
of landings.
lots of landings there too. So yeah, and you want to have the person in the seat to have those experiences, to have not, every flight went perfect every time. You want the guy that's kind of seen a few things, and guy or gal, right? And all right, so one of the things that I think really sets apart like good captains from great captains, and this is something that they've incorporated into training and whatnot, is this CRM, cockpit resource management. But not only doing that, but really this person is not the authority, right? A good captain is going to solicit input from all the other crew members. In other words, they don't put themselves above everyone. They put themselves in a position where they utilize all of their resources and to have the best possible outcome from a situation. And so I do find that the person in this seat, right, is really good at communication, is good at soliciting input from others. And we saw this with Sully. And we've seen this, ever since I think it was in the 80s where the Sioux City, Iowa crash, where that captain, where it was Denny Fitch, and I'm drawing a blank on the captain's name right now. But, he really utilized all of his resources. And it was this mindset that, like, this person in this seat doesn't mean that everybody needs to listen to you. It means that they're good at soliciting input from all of their resources. And those resources can even be on the ground.
Absolutely. That's a great summary of it. And, when I first got hired at the airlines, because I didn't get to fly, it was like really sad. Because I was sitting back there as a flight engineer, but I tell you what, I got to see that CRM in action in so many different varieties. It was such a revelation to watch crews that work really well together. So you just described a good captain. That's not most captains,
right? Yeah.
But so even during emergencies, watching how much better the whole entire process goes when you have that. We're still talking about somebody with authority, right? And they make that final decision. But man, I tell you what, they never think they know it all. Those are the best captains. They maybe even if they do know it all, they don't act that way, right?
Yeah.
So,
right.
Yeah.
And at some point, somebody has to make the final decision. But at the same time, I think a great captain is one that just taps into all the resources. Because in the case of the Sioux City, Iowa crash, they really said like nobody should have survived that. But they did because they utilized all of their resources and the best possible outcome to a terrible situation. So, all right. So we have a lot of technology in this airplane. In fact, there's some really cool pieces of technology that are optional on this airplane that not every airplane has. So, part of flying, whether it be commercial or business aviation, is flying in inclement weather. Here in Colorado, we get snow, we get rain, and oftentimes if you're in the rain here, you get icing. Taking it down to minimums, meaning the lowest possible altitude that we can fly the airplane before. If we don't see the airport, we have to do a missed approach. We don't get that a whole lot here. But in other parts of the country, like Minnesota, you get it all the time. So some of the technology on this airplane allows you to be in an environment not like the 50s or 40s when we were talking to the captain on this airplane earlier, and he's just like, yeah, I flew in Africa. We had a compass and a stopwatch, and like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? You're descending down through clouds like that. But talk a little bit about the technology, maybe not specific to this airplane, that's available to you for instrument flying.
Yeah, I love all the stuff that's coming out that I'm seeing. Like we were just saying, the heads-up display that's an option on here. And the really cool thing is that the entire world is mapped now. The surface of the Earth is mostly mapped. So when I look at the future, maybe what this is going to look like for the people just now learning how to fly, I think what we're going to start seeing is maybe not a need for an instrument rating because you will be able to put.
Can see.
You can see.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you still got to teach that because it's going to fail, right?
Yes.
So you still, and I still remember my very first IFR flight, and I'm thinking, I heard about vertigo, what that looks like. I'm like, yeah, it's not going to happen to me. Holy crap! The first time I was in the clouds, it was terrifying because when you've got your foggles on, you can take a quick peek and look out there, right?
And know your level. Yeah, you're like, okay, I'm climbing, but my wings are level. I know exactly what you mean.
Yes, and the first day, and then it's so cool though. After you've done it enough, it's such a seamless transition. You just become one with the airplane, and you just have this instant ability to look outside and like, oh, we're going in the clouds, and you instantly go to your airplane, and you have to learn how to trust that airplane, right? Because you have to rely on everything it's telling you.
Yeah.
But there's so many things that are coming out, and look at that Cat 3 landing now abilities.
Crazy. Like that, basically, it'll almost land itself, or it does land itself. Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got what is that? The assisted landing, auto land, right?
Auto land.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is amazing to me. Now, it's not like it's not going to taxi you into the FBO or anything. It's an emergency, and you can push a button and it'll communicate that you have an emergency. So if somebody is flying with you, let's say I'm incapacitated, it'll get somebody on the ground safely, hopefully. But it's not to be used like, it's kind of like a Tesla car, right? It's not to be used frequently and go to sleep in your car. But so that is kind of the goal. But there's still a lot of older airplanes out there.
Yeah, vast majority are. I still at any given day, look at all the airplanes that are 50 years and older in the air. I mean, if we maintain our cars like we do airplanes, we'd still be driving Chevy Chevettes around. But truly, maintenance for aircraft is such a different world, and still tons of great aircraft with many hours of time.
Yeah.
Time on them.
Yeah. No, the maintenance intervals, like every airplane is looked at least annually. These airplanes are looked at extensively on prescribed intervals. But yeah, flying in instrument weather, I would say this is much easier than, say, a 20 or 30-year-old airplane where you're still using, the crosshairs on an old instrument gauge ILS approach. So it is pretty amazing.
You had to do, maybe not, NDB approaches?
I did have to do NDB approaches. Yeah, I had to use NDB approaches. And was that the... No, it was the Loran. We had a Loran in our 182 when we had a 182. So I had some old equipment, but the precision and what we have available to us today. And what's interesting to me is I got my instrument rating in 2006.
Okay.
And then I just recently went back and got my commercial and then my multi-commercial. And what was interesting, because I don't fly instrument out here in Colorado too much because, again, ice or granite, which you don't want either. And everything is GPS now, right? And so all the approaches, I was used to flying ILS approaches, NDB approaches, VOR approaches, and I could do those easily on the steam gauges. Now I've got all this glass, and it does present a different set of challenges for somebody that's been flying for a long time. It is easier, but you have to know what you're looking at. You have to know how to identify if it loses signal, right? And nowadays, flying internationally, you've got spoofing.
Yeah.
And how do you identify that? And spoofing is, for those of you that don't know, this is when nefarious people hijack the GPS signals. Thankfully, nothing like it's been identified, but something could happen if they don't know how to identify it and cross-reference, like, hey, this is somebody's telling our GPS something that's not true, right? But these are all challenges that we face in today's day and age with the advanced technology that we have.
A whole other skill set now that we're being asked of our up and coming. And so I know everybody complains about the next generation, but I tell you what, they're much more capable and able and willing to use this high-end technology and to have
than
that.
Me.
Well, you know,
I'm getting there.
We know what we learn on, right? But the up and coming pilots, they're learning on. You know, glass cockpits, and us old folks, they'll say, "Well, what about the raw skills?" Yes, we definitely still need to have that in there, but and I purposely have been talking to all of our international flight departments to gather information about the GPS jamming and the spoofing. The jamming is easy because it either works or it doesn't. It's the spoofing that is a concern because they not knowing that it's a false signal.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing what adversaries can do. So
yeah.
And so we were laughing because I was looking at the old ADF button down here. I'm like, you know, we're gonna have to go back and put the old-fashioned equipment back in there for a backup, just to have. So
yeah, it's actually, and I believe that's an option, ADF-1, ADF-2 on a lot of these business jets, but it's a reason to have backups, right, to some of this technology that we have. So, well, let's. I really had a lot of fun having this conversation. Chicks in the cockpit. We're going to have to do this again, hopefully. And thanks for watching.